Welcome, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me yet, this is like our fourth week. My name is Dr. Sarah Goodman. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science. Tonight we welcome UCI students, faculty, and members of the community at large to this exceptional event. Along with the International Studies Public Forum, this event is also brought to you by the Institute for International, Global, and Regional Studies. Tonight's event commemorates World Red Cross Day. To celebrate their great work and learn more about relief and assistance efforts around the world, we have very special guests here tonight. What I'm going to do is introduce Maxine Margaritis, American Red Cross Regional CEO, who's then going to introduce Al Panico to us. Okay, so a brief bio of Maxine. As I said, she's the American Red Cross Regional CEO for the Desert to the Sea region, which serves 7.3 million people residing in Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. In this capacity, she leads more than 40 staff, close to 2,000 volunteers, and ensures revenue and expense targets in excess of $9 million annually are met. Prior to moving back to Orange County, Ms. Margaritis served with the Red Cross as regional CEO of the state of Utah for nearly 7 years. Her career also includes nearly 15 years as a consultant supporting a wide array of nonprofit organizations, from school districts to national cancer organizations in capacity building, funding, and organizational development. Her nonprofit career as a volunteer began at the Red Cross, and since has engaged in a variety of volunteer activities and has served on numerous nonprofit boards and advisory committees. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Margaritis.
It's really nice to see everyone tonight. Thanks so much for taking time and making time and sharing your interest in the work of our organization. It's been a little while since I've been in a classroom, but it feels really nice to be back in this space. So I really appreciate the academic realm and communities of learning, and I'm glad to be here tonight. I want to acknowledge before I begin, we have 3 interns who are with the American Red Cross. I think you guys may know them. We have Kathy, Reka, and Amber, and they're right here on the front row. Reka and Amber are going to be representing Orange County at the American Red Cross National Headquarters in early June for a campaign on international humanitarian law. And so we're thrilled to have Orange County represented, certainly by UCI at this national conference. I think we were one of maybe 20 groups from across the country. So if you have more questions about international humanitarian law, you're about to have some experts on the ground here. And we'd encourage you, if you have interest in being engaged with us as an intern, you'll want to visit with a member of our team. I'm going to introduce 2 of my team members now. Matilde Gabriela is our manager of our international services and our services to the armed forces, and Meredith Mills is our communications public affairs director. And so if you have interest in being an intern, Matilde is your go-to person. So I just want to take just a few minutes because I know that you really want to hear about Al's story and his experience, which is going to be quite amazing, an amazing experience. But I want to just start off by sharing with you a little bit about the Red Crescent movement, and specifically maybe a little more about the American Red Cross. We are a part of the world's largest humanitarian organization. We partner and serve together with 189 Red Cross or Red Crescent societies in different countries around the globe. We have unparalleled access as a result to many places that a lot of other organizations cannot gain access to because of that. And we are able to gain access to really difficult to reach places because of the span that we were engaged in. The other thing that the Red Cross is unique in is that we have expertise in all kinds and all sizes of communities, and I think that's a unique feature of our organization. So you guys have all heard about the Red Cross and big disasters, right? Is that when you hear about the Red Cross? What else do you know about the Red Cross? Shoot it out there. Blood, okay? Those are usually the two big things that people hear about. And with disasters, we always hear about the really big ones. We hear about Superstorm Sandy or the typhoon in the Philippines. But the fact of the matter is that the Red Cross around the globe is engaged in disasters every single day of all sizes and all shapes. And those silent disasters, the ones that don't make the press, are every bit as devastating to the people they impact as the ones that are hitting large populations in large community events like Sandy or like Japan. And I would imagine, I've not experienced a disaster personally in a natural disaster in this way, but I would imagine if you're by yourself in a disaster experience, that might even be more challenging. And so when you think about that reach, that's kind of an amazing thing. So globally, large and small, the Red Cross is there. In this country, we respond to about 70,000 disasters on average every year. It's a lot of disasters. We do that with volunteers. So in times of war and disasters, as you can imagine, people are separated. In the chaos, they become separated from one another, maybe can't find one another, may end up all over the globe. One of the programs that we have is a Restoring Family Links program that works to help reunite people who have been separated through war and conflict. And we do that through our network and being able to send messaging between people who are in this country, reaching out to people who are around the globe, and then receiving messages to help unify. We also are able to document the fate of loved ones or send messaging for people who have been impacted through events like the war and then the Holocaust. We still do some Holocaust cases even now. These services are all free. In this country, American Red Cross Disaster Relief is free. We don't charge people for our services. We rely on the generosity of the American public to do that work. And the International Tracing Services, Restoring Family Link, it's also free. One of the things that we have learned as an organization is that if you invest before something happens, you can really mitigate the kind of damage that you have after a disaster happens, or you can mitigate the impact on someone's health if you do some time and investment in advance of any of those events. So we really focus on preparedness programs. We really look at trying to make sure that people have information, prevention kinds of programs around disease internationally, which I'm sure Al will talk about. And we know that for every dollar spent in advance of a calamity, we save about 4 on the other end. So it's actually fiscally responsible to engage in preparedness and mitigation activities before something happens. So the other thing that we do is make sure that we educate, and internationally we engage in health kinds of activities. So measles is a great example. We have a measles campaign, and it's kind of amazing to know that in this day and age, people are still dying of measles. And so the American Red Cross has joined with its international partners to help work on that campaign, and we support countries that have measles as a problem by providing funds and resources, and those countries' volunteers are on the ground educating and providing vaccines. That's another example of that work. Malnutrition is another piece, obviously, and I may be off a slide here, so if they don't line up, we could talk a little bit about that. But I guess I want to talk a little bit about measles, because measles is something that people have been trying to eradicate around the globe for some time. And it's kind of amazing that, we're closing the gap, but there's still such a gap to go. And that's a really great international service program that we engage young people in. It might be something of interest as your friends come back from the IHL conference in Washington, D.C., that they can share more information with you about how to engage and connect as students here with students across the country and around the globe. So that's one way of really connecting. I think other programs that deal with things like malaria, all kinds of other issues that happen in many countries around the globe that we don't really think about here are part of daily life in other places. We talked a little bit about international humanitarian law. We actually have 2 programs, international humanitarian law and exploring humanitarian law, to educate youth and adults about the importance of international humanitarian law and its relevance in your daily lives. Al, are you going to get into the international humanitarian law and Geneva Convention?
Yeah.
So if you don't know what that means, spend some time online and take a look at what the rules of war are and the way that we connect to making sure that all people, that humanity is central in the work that we do, regardless of the side of a calamity or a war, regardless of whether or not they are, a certain faith, a certain gender, or whatever. We center humanitarianism, humanity, in the middle of all of that. And that's really our genesis. I guess the last thing I want to say before I introduce Al briefly is just to tell you that the Red Cross, in my view, is really an emblem, a brand, and a structure for all of us to participate in to make a difference in our world. The vast majority of people who work in the Red Cross, I would say around the globe, certainly in this country, are volunteers. They're people like you who give their time, their money, their blood, their expertise, their hearts, and really reach out to one another to make a difference in the way that we live. And so if you have interest in this kind of work, in doing humanitarian work, something that has a global connectivity to it, You can do amazing things with very little time and investment, and it's a great way to meet folks. It's a great way to broaden your skills and your horizons, and I would encourage you, if not through this organization, to look at ways to expand and connect how you work in the world. So that's just a brief intro. I'm delighted to turn the presentation over to Al Panico, who is the head of the International Federation of the Red Cross, Asia Pacific area, and he's going to give you a lot more information. And thanks so much for your attention.
Wow. Students, this is my dream, to actually talk to students and to be able to share some of what I've done. I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm going to tell you a lot of things. What I want to do today in the next 35 minutes or so is tell you about my story. I want to tell you a little bit about the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement. I'll tell you about some disasters and trends in aid, and then I'll take some questions and maybe I'll have some answers. Today is World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day. Who knew that? Cool, excellent. Today is World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day, and today I work for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent. I'll tell you all about them. We are launching a campaign about my story because there's millions of people, 17 million volunteers, 78 million members of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent all over the world. It's really an awesome story. And today we celebrate the power of humanity and the power of community and the power of the work that we do. And we're telling our story. That's why no one's introduced me. You don't know who the heck I am. Because I want to tell you my story so you know me. And I am sure that there's many in here who have a Red Cross story. There might be a Red Cross story in your family. I sure hope that maybe by the end of my talk that I inspire you to have a Red Cross story in case you don't. Right now I want a show of hands. How many people are born in the United States of America? Put your hands down. How many people are born outside of the United States of America? Keep your hands up. Of those here, how many people of you without your hands up had your parents born outside the United States of America? How many people, keep your hands up, how many people had your grandparents born outside the United States of America? So look around, quite a few people. I like to know who I'm talking to first before, okay, put your hands down. I just want to know who I'm talking to before I tell my story. I'm born in the United States of America. Quite a few years ago, I'm really old. I've been with the Red Cross 42 years. I started as a volunteer. I just got this out of an archive that my mother had, who kept this clipping from 1972 in my first volunteer job with the Red Cross. And I was struck by this quote that said, "I thought the Red Cross was a bunch of upper-class do-gooders, but they really do help." I was proud to be a part of the Red Cross Relief Program. And I still am proud to be part of the Red Cross. This disaster, when I started with the Red Cross, I'm the head of International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in Asia Pacific Zone. Our headquarters is in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. And we cover all of Asia and the Pacific, from New Zealand to Afghanistan and from the Democratic Republic of Korea down to Maldives. So that's all the way from this end down there to this end up over here, and all the way from there to over here. It's really big. I have done a lot of traveling since I've been there, but I wasn't always there. I've been there for about 5 years. I started with the Red Cross over here in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. I was a student, like many of you, at Penn State University. And I went up to this flood after Tropical Storm Agnes in a town called Lock Haven. I was in State College. And I was shoveling mud with some college buddies. And this woman came and tapped on my shoulder, literally, and said, "Do you want to be a Red Cross volunteer?" And it was June, and I had summer break, and I thought, hey, why not? What the hell? So I was a volunteer, and I went into this auditorium and this gymnasium, rather, and she had training. Another woman had training for us to be caseworkers in a disaster. And then in that afternoon, this woman set up this gymnasium as a family service center, and there were people the next day streaming in. I came back the next day as a caseworker, and these people came streaming in for help with their flood disaster, to replace their clothing, their beds, find a place to stay. It was awesome. So I worked there for 5 weeks, and when I finished working there in Lock Haven, I went back to my town in State College, and I called newspapers. This is one of them. I called 2 radio stations. I was telling people about the Red Cross. I didn't know there was a Red Cross in my town, actually. And I had a call from the woman who was the executive, like Maxine, Orange County. This woman called and she said, I saw your article in the paper and I thought I'd let you know that we're here, and do you want to come in and be a volunteer? And I said, no, I've been a volunteer, thank you very much. And I hung up and we finished at that. Then about 2 months later, she called again. And she said, we have some first aid training, and I wanted to know if you wanted to be trained in first aid. I said, no, I already had my training at Penn State, and thank you very much, bye. Then she called again a couple months later, and she said there was somebody there from Harrisburg, which was the state capital, and they were doing some training. And I thought, good Lord, I'm just going to have to deal with this and go in and be a volunteer, or she's never going to stop bothering me. And that was really amazing, and that woman became my mentor, my hero, my idol, because she saw something in me that I didn't even know I had, whatever that was, and helped me to aspire to work and be a volunteer. And of course, I worked for her very diligently throughout my university days as a Red Cross volunteer, just like these 3 young ladies here. Then I went on from there to work in Mississippi. Red Cross kept me busy during my college years, my university years. Every disaster I went on, they pulled me out, and I went to so many national disasters. Then I went to Mississippi as a disaster director there and worked a lot of disasters, had some international training, got involved there. Went to Dallas as the head of disaster for North Texas. Then I left Red Cross for a while, went to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. After a year, I came back to Red Cross in Los Angeles. I was there for 4 years. And then I left there and went to international services at national headquarters, where you're going next week, and I was the head of operations there. And all this time I had worked so many disasters and met so many people and just grew my Red Cross work. Some of the disasters that I worked on, you might be interested in, it was as a caseworker, a volunteer caseworker with the Vietnamese boat people operation in 1975. Wow, that was a long time ago. The Loma Prieta earthquake. Then I left Red Cross again at that time for a short while. Actually, it was in Northern California. I worked at the Loma Prieta earthquake in Santa Cruz, and I was the director of that operation. And then I went back there to run a community agency that was funded by the American Red Cross to provide grants, just like Maxine said, to provide training and preparedness activity to a lot of different senior service homes and schools and other community organizations. At that time, it wasn't as developed as it is now in California, and we did a lot of training on disaster preparedness and earthquake preparedness. But then I left there, and somebody called me from Red Cross headquarters and said, hey, Al, we have a job in Malawi, do you want to go? At that time, I had gone on several international operations, 1985 Mexico City earthquake, and worked there for 6 months. But by that time in the 90s, I hadn't actually lived overseas for an extended period of time, and I said, sure, I'll go. And I went with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent and worked there, and then worked on several other countries, Rwanda refugee, the genocide that occurred in Rwanda, and that has just had an anniversary that you all may have learned about or studied, or certainly read about recently. In 2000, I was in Nairobi, and there was a bomb blast. And that was the start of the recognition of terrorism. And that was a bomb blast at the US Embassy. Some of my very good and dear friends who were working there, I was with the Red Cross, but I had some American friends at the embassy, were killed. And the Red Cross sprang to action. The Kenya Red Cross sprang to action and recovered quite a few. I don't remember how many deaths there were there. It was probably about 80 something. And they had recovered quite a few dead bodies, and we worked around the clock for weeks in that operation. And the volunteers there from the Kenya Red Cross were just magnificent and had worked so incredibly hard and learned a lot from the International Federation because we were there supporting them. Our office was there supporting them and supporting the national societies of that region. Well, I came back to the American Red Cross headquarters at that time, unbeknownst to me. The Federation and the American Red Cross had made a deal, and they pulled me back into headquarters as the Vice President for International Services. And that was like a really big job. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then I had a fantastic offer from Gateway Computers. Well, from a friend of mine who worked at Gateway Computers, wanted me to come out and meet the CEO of Gateway, who was Ted Waite. Anybody remember Gateway Computers? They sold out to Acer in Taiwan, but that's another story. And Ted Waite was a multi-billionaire at that time, and he was actually leaving the company as the CEO and established a family foundation in San Diego. So I came back to California and worked as the chief administrative officer for Ted and his family foundation and with the Gateway Community Foundation. So I worked there for quite some time. At that time, it was really a lot of things happening. 9/11 happened. I actually went back to the Red Cross, and they wanted to hire me back to work on 9/11, but I didn't go back. I stayed in San Diego. But then I went back to Red Cross after the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. They recruited me back. They said we need to. So I've been in Asia ever since 2004 now. I just am leaving there at the end of this month and plan to retire and do some other things, some other things. But one of the things I wanted to tell you about was a volunteer that I just met in Sri Lanka. And I was just there about a month ago, and this person he had never been in the area where he was. He was in his home village, but he was born outside of his home village. He was about 20 years old, and his parents had left his village 10 years before that because of the war in Sri Lanka. If you are aware of that conflict with the Tamil and the Tamils and the Sinhalese in Sri Lanka, they were fighting for a separate homeland there. The war has ended now, and they've all been reunited with their home villages. And this kid was part of a village unit and part of a family, and he was actually a Red Cross volunteer. They were teaching him how to run a camera. He filmed this event that I went to open up, dedicate these houses that the Red Cross had built for them. And he said the main thing that he wanted to do was to learn more about the Red Cross and to be better able to help other people the way the Red Cross had helped him. I was really moved by that. Anyway, so what I want to do now, though, is move on and tell you a little bit about the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. Maxine mentioned a little bit about the the three components, the main components of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. I'll go through this rather quickly. But the International Committee of the Red Cross is basically the original body, founded on the works of Henri Dunant, who wrote a book about the Battle of Solferino. This was a very moving book and really moved people to action to create a Red Cross and Red Crescent to help people on the battlefield. It was, I'll go into more of that when I talk a little more about that, ICRC. The national societies, there's 189 of them worldwide. There are others in formation. The last Red Cross to be named a Red Cross was the Red Cross, I believe, of South Sudan. New country, new Red Cross. Before that, I was involved quite heavily with the establishment of the Maldives Red Crescent. You know what the difference between a Red Cross and a Red Crescent is? Red Cross is a Red Cross, like the American Red Cross. In Islamic countries, they're generally named Red Crescents because there's some offensive nature to a cross in some countries. In Indonesia, it's still the Indonesia Red Cross. It's not a Red Crescent. So in some Islamic countries, it's still a Red Cross, and some have changed it to a Red Crescent. But there's 189 strong. This is where these 17 million volunteers are located, and all over the world, and all of the other members that contribute, give blood, and help out. The International Federation, which was established in 1919, was established by an American, Henry Davidson, and that is I call it the club. That is the membership organization that provides service to those 189 national societies to help develop them, help build their capacity, and coordinate international disaster relief. The uniqueness of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement, as we call these three, and there are very big elements that are involved in these other three that I mentioned. Governments are involved. There's every 4 year an international conference that the governments give the Red Cross the work that they need to do. All the Red Cross organizations, including the American Red Cross, are chartered by their Congress or their parliament. You have to meet certain conditions to be a Red Cross. It's basically a 12-step process that you have to meet certain conditions. One of them being you have to be appointed by the parliament of your country. Not appointed, but chartered and recognized as an independent organization, not an NGO or not a volunteer organization, but as an independent organization. You generally get no funding from your governments, but in some cases you may take contracts from your governments to do certain work when government is not able to. One of the things here I want to mention are the 7 fundamental principles. You can look them up online. Anybody know what they are? Well, yeah, I wouldn't expect it. You do. Can you tell me?
Is it humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and
Universality.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very good. Excellent. Those are the 7 fundamental principles that all the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, organizations have in common. The way I actually remember that, if you use the acronym HINEVU, you'll remember that. Okay, whatever. The ICRC, as I said, provides, well, I didn't say this, but you might have gathered that because it was formed out of a war, it provides aid primarily to victims of conflict and victims of war and armed violence. They're the originators and the protectors of international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, the rules of war. They're independent, formed under the Geneva Conventions. It's a private organization. It's governed by Swiss citizens. Switzerland, as a neutral country, is where the headquarters is. It's where the headquarters of the International Federation is also located. National societies, like the American Red Cross, provide a range of services. They're auxiliary to the government. Like I said, they auxiliary to public authorities, generally in disaster area or health, like collecting blood in certain countries, like here. I think that Maxine talked a little bit about national societies, and they all pretty much provide humanitarian assistance. They're there in an emergency. They're there when you need them. And in some countries, they're highly resourced, like American Red Cross. In others, they barely can open their doors, but they have volunteers, and volunteers run the place. And the International Federation, as I said, it's a membership organization. You, as a Red Cross, as the American Red Cross, is one of the larger members, and there are 188 other members in the club, for which the Federation provides the standards, the various laws and governance, the norms that must be followed and that all agree to, the coordination in a disaster. Can you imagine if 180 societies all went to Sri Lanka after tsunami, or Indonesia or Japan independently? It would be chaos. The Red Cross has a very detailed and structured coordination system where we can provide what's needed, where it's needed, when it's needed, and we have a very good reputation for that. And that was my job, to coordinate that with a lot of staff. I will move now to the next topic, which I could really talk about forever, and it's going to be hard to kind of squeeze it in, but I'm going to try. And maybe I can even make a copy of this presentation available if you want a copy. I'll send you a copy and you can put it on your site. The trends in Asia, oh man, Asia's great. I love living there. I've been there for 9 years. It's awesome. It's so youthful. There's so much energy and so much youth. And the economies are growing like crazy, 27% of global GDP at present. People have a can-do attitude generally. The center of gravity is, in my view, is moving to Asia. But there's still a lot of problems. It's home to half the world's population. You can see a lot of these people in India and China live on less than $1.25 a day. 1.8 billion, less than $2.50 a day on average. 40% of disasters annually, some years it's 50%, happen in Asia. Much of the growth is, of course, attributed to the rise of China and India. A couple of awesome countries, very specific nature as to interacting and engaging. Things are not done like America. When I went back to the Red Cross in 2005, I said I went back after I worked for Gateway. I was in California for 5 years with Wait Family Foundation. And I went back, I was recruited to go back to the Red Cross because of this big disaster. And I thought, oh God, I said, I don't know if I can do that because I had lost my patients. I didn't know where I put them. And I thought, if I'm working for the Red Cross, I gotta have a lot of patience because there's so many cultures and there's so many ways of operating and there's so many different people and you have to take all that into account. I thought, oh dear. But I found my patients pretty quickly and was able to do it. But you have to have a lot of patience to work in places like India, China, and others. This is what I call the Asian century. A generation ago, more than 2 of 5 people living in the developing world lived in poverty. Today, it's down to 1 in 5. The Millennium Development Goals, goal number 1 was to reduce poverty to less than 50 or 50% from what it was. That was met in 2010. A lot of that due to advances in China and India. Still a long way to go. Those are huge populations. You could take the population of Canada, the US, and a couple other countries I can't remember, and that would be like China. It's huge. But growth lies at the heart of poverty reduction. And I'm sure that in international work here and studies that you do, you see that. But things are not all good. Countries get into a middle income trap. When you get into a middle income trap, you can't seem to take the next step to developed status, fully developed status. They can't make that transition from resource-driven growth to consumer and productivity-driven growth. And consumerism inside the country. Some countries that are examples of that are Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, even China and India. The countries which have avoided that middle income trap are Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, which is not really a country, but is still, rather independent of China. Rising inequality, global issue, especially prevalent in Asia. Rich certainly benefiting from growth more than the poor. People are really willing to work, but they seem to be having a difficult time getting ahead. Inequality of opportunity. This inequality can weaken growth itself. Why has this risen? Technology has not people have not been able to keep pace with technology. Globalization, market-oriented reform, they drive this growth in Asia, but they favored the capital over labor, money over fair wages, skilled over unskilled. There's not enough education, and cities over inland areas, and people are flocking to the cities, and they're becoming huge. There's also tremendous environmental issues in Asia. The dilemma of this huge and fast environmental growth is that this rapid economic and population growth has reduced the supply of resources, trees, water, clean water, and available people in the countryside to actually work in the fields. Of course, you must be aware of the other environmental issues, particularly in Asia: water resource management, deforestation, land degradation, air pollution. It's some of the same that you hear here in California, but their resources and their ability to deal with them are much less. Now, I'm not going to comment about their political will. They do want to deal with it. They'll pay perhaps a little more than some in the United States, but they don't have the resources to do it. Climate change, of course, huge areas will be affected. We have many more floods. Hydrological disasters are increasing. People living in coastal areas, cities, and we already talked about the world's poor living in Asia. Urban areas, the mega cities are very prone to flooding. Jakarta, Bangkok, the Saigon, Dhaka, Mumbai, all these cities have major floods almost yearly. And I'm sure you guys here don't even really hear of them, but they displace hundreds of thousands of people, and they're devastating to their livelihoods and their ability to recover. There's some positive moves towards adapting and using new technologies, but this is still insufficient. I want to just mention one that is really important, and you don't think of it often, and it's a very important element of development. And the countries in Asia are dealing with a lot of conflict and fragility of states. This just gives an indication of where there are fragile states, where there's peace agreements, where there's conflicts. It'll just show, that's the map that shows you where some of these are located. But the list of major subnational and conflicts in South and Southeast Asia are quite significant, and they've been going on for a long time, some 61 years, 64 years. In the Philippines, I heard that in the Philippines, the rebel groups have just come up with a peace agreement, but that happens all the time. I don't have much faith in that, and I know the Philippines very, very well. But the Tamils, probably I should take that one off the list. They have de-escalated that. But the average active conflict is 34 years. Guess what? These things are not going away. They're not ending. And they provide a real impediment to development and being able to work in these areas, even when there's a disaster. Red Cross has difficulty getting to these areas. Now, you might take an example of Myanmar and Burma. I don't know how much that hits the news in the States, but probably not a lot. But the Rakhine refugee situation there is still very serious. You call these stateless people. And there are also, that's in one of the provinces, Kachin province. No, Kachin is up in another area, that's Sitwe area. And there's another war going on just in one country, in Kachin province. So these things are very difficult, although otherwise Myanmar or Burma is a really fantastic place. You should get there before too many other tourists start going. The dimensions of aid. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the overall situation, but the dimensions of aid have changed dramatically. The new aid from China, India, has dramatically changed the talk between countries. The new donors, like China, India, they work in a different way. They work more regionally. They don't have as many restrictions as the Western donors. They don't have the number, they don't do things sectorally. They build a lot of infrastructure, not so much social programs. They leave that to the country, where Western donors are much more focused on transparent, well, let's say democracy building and rights-based. This developing or the new donors really don't hold the receiving countries as accountable. They're more, they're not as sector-based, they're resource, they're agreements, there's not as many restrictions. But it is substantial. And it is actually, in Philippines, after Super Typhoon Haiyan, that occurred just late last year, the Chinese Red Cross and the Chinese built some amazing schools, and they did some relief and some development work faster than any of the other donors. It was amazing. They did it in their own way, and we provided coordination to that group, and we even partnered them up with the American Red Cross on a couple of projects. But they do things differently. And you have to be able to accommodate that. They don't go to the regional meetings. They don't go to the normal donor meetings that you may hear about, or maybe you've had the fortune to attend. The aid composition of these new development partners in 1995 to 98 was 1%. 2005 to 2008, it was 5%. Now, by 2020, it's expected to reach 20%. So their impact is significant. And the recipient countries now have a choice. And they can work with donors other than US, Great Britain, Sweden, and some of the, what you would call a little bit of the more focused donors, focused on how we might focus relief or development on from a Western perspective. These are done from a more Southern perspective. And we have got to be able to, actually, not we, you, have got to be able to accommodate that. I think that that is one of my key messages that I want to ensure that, or I want to highlight for you. I can tell you all about how things were, how things are, but it's up to you guys to actually plan how things are going to be. And that is really awesome. That is really like intimidating. And you should be worried. And you should be thrilled and excited about that. And I have a tremendous, tremendous optimism about what you will do. I also have grandkids, and I have like tremendous optimism about what they will do. So what are the, finally, lastly, and I'm going to just say, what are the response trends? Emergence of a new humanitarian environment, and you can read those. I'll provide a copy of this. I want to stop now and leave it open for some questions. I've got a 4-minute video that I will show at the end, maybe after, if anybody wants to see it, because I think I'd rather take some questions now. And I have a really cool video of U2, Bono and U2 afterwards. So let's go questions. Did I scare you, bore you, or something like that? Let me find some students here.
I'll start off. I know I'm not a student.
You're not a student, but
No.
you're university. Okay, fine.
Yeah, okay, and then I'm sure students will follow with more questions. Can you relate a little bit more of what you did in Asia to this question of changing donors? I mean, did you work with your changing donors? I guess I didn't think of the Red Cross so much as
No.
working so closely with
The aid. Oh, absolutely.
the donor community, or how do you work with the donor community, and how does it make a difference for the Red Cross's work on the ground in actual disasters to have, say, China and India and those countries coming in as major
Good question.
sources?
Good question. Right off the bat, an example: Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has that where I told you about that volunteer who's really cool building houses. The money that we get to build those houses came from the government of India, and we are one of the implementers of some of the funds that these Southern donors, Western donors had. That's how we get our money to operate, is from Swedish SIDA, British USAID, British Development Agency, and China Foreign Affairs Department. And we work very closely with them in the International Federation. They are our donors. And we also coordinate them and some of the work that their agencies do on the ground. So we work very differently with them. Also, because we have the national societies in those countries, like the China Red Cross, they get funding from their government to do work, just like the American Red Cross receives money from USAID or the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance to do work. So that was my role, is to work with the aid agencies in South Korea, China, India, Thailand, etc. Yeah. The aid environment and the aid dynamics are very important to the International Red Cross, and it is important to all of the countries that operate, and anyone that operates and works internationally. Yeah.
Yeah. I know when you were in that newspaper article, you were quoted saying that you thought the Red Cross was a bunch of upper-class do-gooders, and obviously you don't think that's true, but I'm so curious to know what is the demographics of the people who are doing Red Cross work, and how much is the local community really involved in
The local, in an individual country or in America?
I guess both, like if you're doing something within America, how much is involved or like another country? I'm speaking in more general terms, I guess.
Well, internationally, in any country, it's the community that we empower. That and if we work in a country, the international, let's say, community works in a country. We work with the agencies in that country to actually do the work and do the implementation. We may have some funding, some standards, some method, some tools of how to operate, and we know what to do, but we work with the community, and they come from all levels. I mean, I've had a lot of volunteers in Indonesia after the tsunami. A woman lost all her family. She lived in a village. She became a Red Cross volunteer. They're community health workers, and they're very locally based. In America, do you want to address that?
In this country, we use volunteers every day to respond to disasters. Am I talking to your lapel? There we go. So, am I talking to his lapel? And so, even this week, we've had volunteers who've responded to disasters in Orange County. They're our first responders. They're trained. They know what to do, and they're the ones who receive the call from emergency management. They go. They assess the situation. They help ascertain, what the family or families might need. If there are multiple families involved, they can initiate setting up shelters and call out other volunteers. And then our volunteers are trained. We start on the ground and work out in concentric circles based on the size of the disaster. So many of our volunteers also deploy to very large events. We had a lot of people from our communities that helped out in Sandy. We just had someone who just came back from working the mudslide in Washington State. So we are an organization of volunteers. That's how we do it. So if you want to get involved, the best thing to do is get trained in advance so you can be very useful when an event happens, or you can even sign up as a spontaneous volunteer for larger events when they occur. Training in advance, you saw earlier, that prevention piece is really, really helpful. And it's a better use of your time and a better way to help people.
Yeah.
How much of the money actually goes into running the organization, and how much of it is left to the others?
If you look on the American Red Cross website, usually about 91 cents or 90 cents of a dollar goes into direct service or service to people, and 10% runs the organization. I think in the international, it's about the same internationally. We keep our costs down to, for real management, to about, or administration, about 10%. 6.5 is what we charge, 6.5%. It's called the PSSR, the Program Service Support Remittance. But usually it's like 10%. We charge 6.5 to a donor, but then we squeeze the other 3.5, 2.5 from somewhere else. Yeah.
You said that the Red Cross branches that work with the traditional donors do democracy building and social work like that. And I was wondering if that conflicted with the stated purpose of the Red Cross, in which it says it won't have any partisan or political influence on a given area or country.
Yeah.
Or if there's something.
Actually, I didn't say that. It wasn't the Red Cross that was involved in democracy building as such. It's the, and that's a really good question. The traditional donors, like the America, Britain, Sweden, and those donors are oftentimes involved in democracy building and focused on different elements than the southern donors or the emerging donors. It's not necessarily the Red Cross that does that. However, having said that, I always remind those donors from the north, that the Red Cross is the original democratic organization. Because when you are at a branch level, or a chapter in this case, or a service center, those people that govern that and what they do are actually elected from among the members. And there's quite a lot of, let's say, promotion that goes on, even at a village level, to elect somebody as the head of the team, the head of the chapter, elect them onto the board. So it's different than it's not democracy building in the country. Did you have a follow-up, and then I have one in the back?
No.
Yeah.
I just quick follow-up. You can see elections in like at the village level in non-democracies.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely the case. The people that are the leadership within the Red Cross have to be appointed. Now, they may have a counterpart that is the county commissioner or the mayor, but it's an elected position. Yes.
Particularly in areas of conflict, has the Red Cross ever been accused of being biased towards one side of the conflict? And if so, how do they deal with that?
All the time. All the time. We're always accused by the other side of being too focused on the other side, on one side of being too focused with help on the other side. And if we enter into a conflict area, and which we do, we get agreement from both sides to allow us to enter in. That's part of our fundamental principle of neutrality. But certainly in Sri Lanka is a really good example. Sometimes, quite often, I would say, the government really hated the Red Cross and tried to block us sometimes because they thought that we were being too generous to the Tamils. And even some of the Sinhalese had some misgivings about the Red Cross. But for that, we have to remain always transparent and, pretty strict about how we enter into areas of conflict. Like in Myanmar now, in Kachin or with the Rakhine area, those two provinces, we have to be very careful of how we enter into and how we talk. And if one will let you in and the other won't, we don't go in. Yes?
Yeah, I just have two questions. You discussed the middle income trap facing countries like Vietnam, China, Malaysia, and so on. And I was just wondering why that's important to the Red Cross. And furthering that, is there a development benchmark tied to per capita GDP that the Red Cross utilizes in its aid efforts?
On the last part of that, no, it doesn't. We don't have a benchmark GDP that we use to help or not to help. Why it's important to us is because our work is at the community level, and poverty is at the root of a country being able to kind of take the next step or not. We help communities and we help people become more resilient. Because if a community is more resilient, they're able to address their disaster needs or their family's needs when they have whether it's a disaster, natural, a conflict, an economic disaster, somebody loses their job. It's all about resilience. And that's a cornerstone of the work that we do. So when a country is trapped in that, and when a country like India or China has so many people that are still trapped in that country of a middle income trap, and the inequality grows, that's a very important issue to us. And one of our jobs, every one of those slides, I could take a 3-hour course on. But one of the elements in here that I didn't talk about, it was humanitarian diplomacy. Humanitarian diplomacy is because of our strength, because of our presence, because of our, 100 million volunteers, members, contributors, we have a voice at the big table. And when we have a voice at the UN, with the governments, when we can speak on behalf of communities, and we know communities, that's a really heavy responsibility. So countries in a middle income trap, or in poverty, or in conflict situations are really, really important to us in the Red Cross. Yeah.
Are there any instances where the Red Cross has conflicted with government organizations or corporations, or what are some frustrations with dealing with organizations within a country or community?
Yeah, that is what I call a cultural competency requirement. We have problems globally with tobacco companies, with alcohol companies. We don't take money from them. We don't work with them. We take money from Coca-Cola, should we? We have a partnership with Coca-Cola, should we? I don't know. We have a certain standard level that's governed by policy at that top level that provides these norms, this guidance of how a national society, how a Red Cross should operate and that when you have those kind of ethical, that's an ethical conflict, and you have some ethical standards that we follow. So do we have conflicts even at local level? All the time. All the time with having access in a province, in a town, and the government would give you the list of beneficiaries that you were to help build their house or support, and we would say, no, we're not going to do that. We have a principle and we have a standard. We will identify our own beneficiaries and we will help those that are most vulnerable. We don't take the list. We will look at the list and include it, and we will verify the list that the government gives us. And we have a lot of individual problems like that, but that's why we need people like me, or like you will be, to be able to deal with those. And those things are changing rapidly, and how you deal with those. And when people have more access to knowledge and information, it's changing. The way that you're gonna have to learn to manage it is gonna be like really different.
When you were talking about self-growth, you were saying when you're traveling, you need to find patience. How did you find patience?
I think it was remembering the first old lady that I helped who was in a wheelchair, because my mother had another clipping with a picture of a lady in a wheelchair from that 1972 disaster. And I remembered the gift of kind of salve, like of patience that I got from that lady. And then from that chapter exec that called me like 3 times before I would say, oh, for God's sake, I'll go in. I learned it then, and I just kind of went back in and got it out. It was actually there, I just didn't know it was there because I got really, kind of hepped up in California.
Okay, I want to ask you, it seems like the Red Cross kind of chose you. You were not like planning on going into the Red Cross. My other question is, how do you deal with obviously you go and work with places like this with vast visitation. How do you deal with the emotional aspect of it?
The Red Cross, yeah, you could say, for me personally, I did not track a career in the Red Cross. In fact, for years I said, if I'm ever going to get out of the Red Cross, I got to do it now, because I loved it. I just loved the work I did, and I loved the people I touched, and I loved the volunteers that I was able to work with and the people that I could help develop. And I just loved it, and it found value in me and kept me on. It's like any kind of job. If you are committed to it and you're crazy for it and you love it, they're gonna like promote you or something like that. So that's how that happened to me. The emotional aspect, I tell people like really crazy stuff. Like, if you piss me off, I got 40 years of post-traumatic stress disorder on my shoulder, and you make me blow, you're gonna be sorry. I get off my emotions a little bit with humor and a little bit else, but I do have my cry moments. But other than that, I try to stay as emotionless as I can.
Dealing with all these environmental disasters, is the Red Cross using its position at the big table and its voice to push for sustainable development or like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. You'll see Rio, 2010, there was a big conference in Busan at those big tables where the Red Cross pushes, and we're oftentimes used to speak at the big table about community development and about what communities need and about what people need, because we hear those things from people like Maxine and the volunteers and the people here in Orange County, but also globally. We have that information directly, and if you want to find it, because I think our time is up, you can find some of this stuff at these websites. I gave you my address. My Panico at IFRC.org is good until probably mid-June, end of June. The other address is my all-time forever address. IFRC.org, ICRC.org. If you go onto ICRC, IFRC.org, you'll find my story is the first. It's on the page for the next several bits of time because it's a new campaign. where we're all like kind of contributing our stories and the rest.
Thanks so much.